Let's do the Pledge of Allegiance to start with.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to start, if each of the attorneys can give us a brief opening statement, starting with the town, then Attorney Met, and then we go into the presentation. We'll have the town make the presentation first, and then the Attorney Met. The witnesses, as you come up to speak, we're going to have you sworn in, okay? And that's it.
Do we know if the tape recorder's been turned on?
Yes, they have.
Yes.
It's going.
Okay,
Yep,
perfect.
we're all set.
Okay. May I begin?
You want to make your opening statement?
I do. Thank you. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, other members of the Police Commission, my name is Michael Harrington. I am here to present on behalf of the town's recommendation, the recommendation of the police chief this evening. To be clear, this case is not whether Mr. Tremblay recorded the police chief or not. This case is solely about whether Mr. Tremblay was honest in his responses to questions asked by the police chief. After speaking with numerous individuals, the police chief concluded, and I believe the evidence will show tonight, that Officer Tremblay was not honest in his responses when he was asked about whether he had secretly recorded the police chief and whether he had told various individuals about whether he had done so. Specifically, I believe the evidence will show that there were 3 lies made. First, when Officer Tremblay denied telling others that he had recorded the police chief making a statement about another officer. Second, saying that others had in fact advised him to record the police chief. And third, when he was asked by the police chief whether he had in fact recorded him, his initial statement was no, and then a few hours later he changed his statement to yes, and then stated that the way he interpreted the word record was that he had made written notes regarding conversations he had with the police chief. As a result, the police chief concluded that Officer Tremblay had violated several general orders. In my presentation, I'm not going to go through all of the details that are contained in the police chief's report, but in summary, they involve truthfulness, the spreading of malicious gossip, insubordination, and conduct generally unbecoming of an officer. Honesty for a police officer is a core job responsibility. And the reason why this is so important is because under the Brady Doctrine, which is a Supreme Court decision, prosecutors must disclose any evidence, exculpatory evidence, including evidence of dishonesty of anyone involved in a criminal prosecution. And that's why it is so important for police officers to be honest in all of their activities. And in this particular case, we believe the evidence shows that Officer Tremblay was dishonest in 3 particular ways, which will render him ineffective going forward as a police officer. Accordingly, we believe that the Police Commission should adopt the police chief's recommendation and terminate the employment of Jason Tremblay as a police officer with the town of Simsbury. Thank you.
Counselor?
Hi, good evening. Gentlemen, my name is Jeff Mentz, and since I'm in court most of the time, I only do stand. So I had the honor and opportunity to represent Jason Tremblay tonight. I have spent nearly the past 30 years representing Connecticut's police officers and law enforcement officials. I've represented nearly 2,000 Connecticut police officers. But you know what? I don't say yes to every client, because not every client is the right fit for the job. Yeah, so I've had an opportunity over the past several months to talk to Jason, to interact with the chief, to interact with Mr. Harrington about this. And Mr. Harrington's depiction of the events is incorrect. This is a story that began with the chief believing that he was being recorded. By the way, it's okay to audio record people. That didn't happen, but we went off on this side tangent and we went all around in a circle And we had an investigation of some kind that, I know you already have my, Mr. Harrington tells me you already have the notes that I provided to him, so I don't want to reiterate everything, but it is my belief, among other things, that Jason was not afforded any fair due process investigation. You can't be the victim, the chief. You can't be the interrogator, the chief. You can't be the disciplinarian, the chief. And you can't be the executioner, the chief. I suggested at the interview that there was a better way to do this if he wanted to get to the bottom of it, which was to hire and engage an outsider to do an investigation to get to the bottom of it, because I alleged that it was really a conflict of interest for the chief to be investigating something that involved him. We shouldn't be here tonight because we don't even have an investigation that afforded Jason due process and the humility and honesty that he was entitled to. The investigation is flawed from the outset. The investigation was done by the person who believed that he was harmed, that he was recorded. So I think, and I gave them fair notice that I thought they should do it a different way, and I've been privy to lots of those other kinds of investigations. I could name 5 people that could have conducted it. But that's not where we went. We went with an investigation conducted by the victim who decided he had been wronged, and the penalty here is execution. My client is deserving of better, and we hope that the evidence will show that. Thank you.
Counselor, you want to present the town?
Yes, we'd like to call our first witness, which is Chief Nicholas Bolter. I believe the witnesses are going to sit up here.
Okay.
And
Give the oath, please.
you have to administer the oath, Mr. Chairman. It's right in front of you.
You solemnly swear and sincerely affirm, as this case may be, that the evidence you shall give concerning this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God, or upon perjury. Never be perjury.
Yes, sir.
Chief Bolter, how long have you been the police chief here in Simsbury?
Since April 2018.
And were you employed by the department in some other capacity prior to that?
Yes, I've been a police officer here since 1999.
And in this spring, did it come to your attention, did someone report to you whether there had been possible recordings of conversations you had with someone?
Yes.
And how did that come to your attention?
I received a phone call on April 10th from Lieutenant Tom Sheehan. He had told me that he had just met with some executive board members from the local union, and they had told him a story that that Jason had recorded me. He had told Ed Kaczynski, the IBPO national rep, who had then told Scott Sagan and Gary Gray, who then told Tom. So that's how it came to my attention.
Okay, so just to break down a few acronyms for the commissioners. IBPO, is that the police union?
Yes, that's the police union.
And so did Mr. Kaczynski work for the police union?
Yes.
And what is your understanding of his position with the union?
I believe his title is national rep.
Okay. And Gary Gray, you mentioned his name. Is he an officer in the department?
Yes, Gary Gray is an officer in the department, and he currently sits as the president of our local police union.
And then you mentioned Scott Sagan. Is he an officer in the department?
Yep, Scott Sagan is a sergeant with the department. He is also on the executive board.
Of the union?
The union, yes.
And so did Lieutenant Sheehan give you any further detail about what had been shared by Mr. Gray and Mr. Sagan with him?
He did. He said that Ed Kaczynski was at a meeting earlier that day with Jason Trombley and Jamie Corcoran, and during their discussions, Jason Trombley had told Ed Kaczynski that he had recorded conversations with me and or the administration, and that I supposedly had said something negative about another officer, and he told that officer, and that officer's response was, well, I have an attorney.
After you received this information from Lieutenant Sheehan, did you ever have any conversations with Mr. Kaczynski?
I did.
When did you speak with him?
So 1 week later, on April 17th, I met with Mr. Kaczynski, Officer Gray, and Sergeant Sagan. And during our meeting, I had asked Mr. Kaczynski about what had happened the week before. And Mr. Kaczynski had said that during the meeting that he had with Jason Trombley, Jason had told him that he recorded conversations with me, and he had it on tape that I said something about another officer, that officer shouldn't be here any longer.
And was that officer named by Mr. Kaczynski, who you supposedly had made a statement that had been recorded?
Yes, the officer was.
And what was the officer's name?
Kevin Morano.
After speaking with Mr. Kaczynski, did you inquire any further about what you had learned?
I spoke to Mr. Kaczynski 2 more times after that, on May 9th and then again on May 13th, which both of those times he said that, he said again that Jason Trombley had said at that meeting that he had recorded conversations with me.
Did you ever speak with Officer Morano about whether he had heard any statements that you had made about him?
I did. I spoke to Officer Morano on April 24th at a training that we were both at. I asked him if a supervisor, without naming the supervisor, had come up to him and told him that I had said something negative about him, and he said no, that supervisor did not, but he had heard rumor of that.
Did you ever speak with Mr. Trombley about what you had heard?
I did.
And when did you first speak with him?
I first spoke with him about this on May 9th, between about 6:30 and 6:45 in the morning at the tail end of his shift.
And about how long did that meeting last?
About 20 to 25 minutes.
And did you ask Mr. Trombley any questions?
I did. One of the questions that I asked him was, did he record any conversations with me and or the administration?
And what did he say in response to that question?
He adamantly said that he did not record any conversations.
And did you have any further discussion about recording conversations with him?
We did. Yeah, so he had said several different times that he did not record any conversations, and in fact, he said he doesn't have any recording devices. He kind of held out his arms and said, I don't even carry a phone on me. And then later on in that same conversation, he had said that he doesn't quite understand why I'm asking him these questions, because it's legal to record conversations in Connecticut.
And the question that you asked Mr. Trombley, was it simply, have you ever recorded me? Was that the question?
Have you ever recorded me or any member of the administration or anybody else?
Did you, in your questioning, qualify that you were asking him about recording audio recordings?
No, I simply said record.
And when he responded, did he indicate in any manner that he did record you through note-taking?
No.
Did you ask Mr. Trombley whether he had ever made any statements about Kevin, saying that you had made statements about Kevin Morano?
Yes.
And what did he say about that?
So at that same time, 6:30-ish in the morning, I did ask him if he had told anybody that he had recorded me or anybody else, and then if he had told anybody about me supposedly saying something negative about Kevin Morano. And he told me that he had not. He had not told anybody about Kevin Morano, about any officers that I had heard that he had said that I wanted to leave here. He also told me that he did tell coworkers on the midnight shift that he recorded me, and that he recorded me and or the administration.
And did he say why he had told people that?
Yes, it was a very sort of confusing, illogical explanation. He said that sort of in the context of things, people on the midnight shift that he worked with were very upset about his recent discipline. In the conversations that he was having with them, they were upset about this, and they felt that if he was being targeted and if he was wrong, then he should be recording the conversations. So Jason said to me, instead of saying something else, he said, I did when they asked, or when they suggested that he record. He said, I have been recording conversations.
So let me get this straight. When you questioned him and you asked him if he had ever recorded you, he said no.
Correct.
But then he told you in that same conversation that he had told other people that he had in fact recorded you.
Yes.
And his explanation was that because people suggested that he recorded you, he said that he was doing so.
Yes, that's correct.
Anything further come out of that conversation that you had with Mr. Trombley on May 9th?
Yes. So I asked him to send an email to me prior to the end of his shift, describing what our conversation was about.
And did he do so?
He did.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have marked as Exhibit 1. Document. Three copies. I apologize.
I'm gonna keep track.
Okay.
So, while we're at this, if there are other items that you want to have admitted, I don't know if you want to do the memo. We had an email in response, I think on September 9th from Attorney Ment. If you want those admitted, you should probably do that at some point.
Okay, yep, I was
This
gonna
is
offer
gonna
the
be
memo.
Exhibit
1.
1.
And there's no objection to it.
Thank you.
So, Chief, if you could just look at the exhibit for a moment. You testified about an email. Is that the email that you just testified to?
Yes, it is. Good.
So the first email was at the bottom of the first page, was sent at 7:59 a.m. That was the email you just testified to, where you asked Officer Tremblay to follow up with a written submission to you, correct?
Correct, at the bottom of the page, yes.
And did he do so?
He did.
And is that the email that's at the top of page 1?
Yes, it is.
And in this email, it states, Mr. Trombley stated that he did in fact record conversations with you.
That's correct.
Was that the first time you had heard Mr. Trombley say that he had recorded a conversation with you?
Yes, completely opposite of what he had said 8 hours prior to.
But in his email, he states that his recordings are written notes, not audio.
Yes, that's what he said.
Did you have any follow-up communication with Officer Tremblay regarding this email that he sent you?
Yes, I did.
And did you ever ask him for the written recordings that he had supposedly made of you?
I did. Yep. Since he had sort of brought this forward that he has written notes of what he considered recordings, I asked him to provide me with those notes. I gave him some specific instructions on how to do that, and I thought that would sort of verify what he is saying.
And what were the instructions? What was the general nature of the instructions you had given him?
So I gave him a thumb drive, told him that it was a clean, brand new thumb drive, there was nothing on it, and I asked him to provide me with an original copy of those notes that he was talking about on that thumb drive, and describe the way to do that, just so it was an original.
And why were you interested in having an original copy of the recordings he had mentioned in his email?
I thought that the metadata on that file would potentially go to support what he is saying, that he has been writing things down after each of the meetings that we had and things like that.
Mr. Chairman, just on that point, since I still have a rotary dial at one of my homes, metadata, can someone just, I think I know what it means, but it would be helpful to know exactly why that's significant.
So it's just the sort of electronic embedded information about a file. So when a file is created on a computer, it will keep track that you don't normally see of what day that file was created, if there were any modifications to that file, when those modifications were. So I was looking to see, well, what's the date on this file with these notes? And if you copy the original over, it would show the date that file was created.
And did Mr. Trombley comply with your directive?
He did not.
Did he say why he was not complying?
Yes, he said he spoke with his attorney, Attorney Ment, and was advised not to.
Did you reissue your directive?
I did. So I reissued it to him, and I sent it to Attorney Ment as well, and asked for the same information.
I could, and did he respond in writing regarding why he was not complying with your directive?
Do you
Yes,
want
he
to
did.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask
Okay.
one more question, and then did you respond to that?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and I offer what I've offered as Exhibit 2.
No objection.
In your email, which is at the top of Exhibit 2, you state to Mr. Trombley that you consider it insubordination not to comply with your directive, correct?
Yes.
And why did you consider it insubordination?
Because I felt that it was important. If he was bringing something forward, that this was possibly a reasoning for why there was a discrepancy, what I concluded as a dishonesty, then I wanted to be able to see that. I wanted to be able to see what he was talking about. He offered that he did this, so I wanted to verify it.
And after you sent this email on June 7th, did Officer Trombley comply with your directive?
He did submit the thumb drive.
Was it compliant with your directive?
It was not. So I used a couple software tools to check out the metadata on it and found that the document that he submitted to me had been created a day or so before submitting that to me.
Do you believe that it was clear to Officer Trombley that you were interested in reviewing the metadata of the original document that he called the recordings of conversations he had with you?
Yes, I do.
Now, did there come a point in time where you commenced an internal investigation regarding this situation?
Yes.
And can you describe for the commission, what is an internal investigation? Internal affairs investigation?
So, when there can be complaints from outside the agency about officers' behavior, malfeasance, or violations of policies, and when they sort of rise to a level that is very serious, then we would do an internal affairs investigation. So just sort of by example, if there was an accusation that an officer was not wearing their hat when they were supposed to be wearing their hat, by policy, then we would be doing an internal affairs investigation about that. But if there are allegations of misconduct, criminal activity, anything that sort of rises to the level of serious disruption to the organization, anything that may expose the town to liability, things like that, we would do an internal investigation.
And with regard to this particular matter, what was of concern to you that you felt an internal investigation was appropriate?
So I felt that the dishonesty was a major problem. I think that truthfulness and honesty are core essentials that we need. And I felt that there was a bigger issue. It wasn't the recording of conversations. It was, what's the environment? Are we in a healthy environment? Is there a lack of trust here? Are we not trusting each other? Do we not trust the rank and file here? We thought that there was a bigger issue. So I felt that there was a need, and having full knowledge that if if officers are untruthful or dishonest, that has some significant repercussions to the police officer, to the department, and to the town.
And what are the repercussions that you're referring to?
So the repercussions are, if an officer is deemed to be untruthful or dishonest, there is an affirmative obligation on the police department's behalf to disclose that information to the courts, to the prosecutors. So it's extremely important to have a police officer be a credible witness. And if an officer is or has been deemed dishonest or untruthful, then the officer's credibility, as well as the department's credibility, is in jeopardy. So what that would mean is, in this particular case, if Jason Trombley was involved in an arrest or any investigation to any degree, that case could be in jeopardy because of his untruthfulness and dishonesty here.
So, can you give us a summary, who was spoken to in terms of the internal investigation that was conducted?
So there were 9 members here who were interviewed.
And who conducted the internal investigation?
I did.
Did you have any concerns with regard to you conducting the internal investigation?
No, sort of the opposite. I had concerns of others investigating only because of the complications with me being the only non-union member in the department. So I wanted to make sure that I handled the investigations and I had no concerns about me handling. I never considered myself a victim in this case.
I was going to ask you if you ever had.
No, never. If somebody was to lie to a sergeant, a lieutenant, somebody lying to each other, there's no need for that. If somebody asks a question, everybody here is expected to provide an honest answer. So never at any time did I find myself or consider myself a victim here.
So whether an officer lied to you or lied to any other member of the department, that's equally concerning for you?
Yeah, or lied to anybody else.
Did any point in the internal investigation, did you learn of anyone who had indicated that they had advised Jason Trombley to record you?
No. And I asked people specifically.
And did you ask Mr. Trombley specifically about who might corroborate his statement that individuals had actually advised him to record you?
Yes.
And who were those individuals? Did he identify anyone?
He did, but not to 100% certainty. Yeah, so he had originally thought it was members working the midnight shift with him, and then we sort of went through the list of those who regularly worked that midnight shift. And he identified 2 officers that, I believe his words were, that probably were the ones.
And did you speak with those 2 officers?
I did speak to those 2 officers.
And did either of those officers indicate that they had ever advised Mr. Trombley to record you?
They never advised me, so.
Mr. Chairman, can I just ask a clarifying question of process? When an internal investigation is done, and you are asking members of the department to respond to questions, is that done under oath or not?
Yes. This particular one anyways, everybody was under oath during the internal affairs investigation interviews, yes. And they signed, they read the notice, they read the oath, they signed it before the interview, and they signed it after the interview.
Thank you.
And the interviews were recorded.
Did any officer indicate that Mr. Trombley had told them that Mr. Trombley had recorded you making some statements or comments about Officer Morano?
Yes.
And who indicated that Mr. Trombley had made that kind of comment?
Detective Tim Met.
What specifically did Detective May report during the internal investigation to you?
So on May 10th, which was a day after that I had spoken to Jason, where he had provided me some information at 9:30 or 6:30 in the morning, and then different information later in that day by email. The day after I spoke with Tim May, and Tim had told me that around April 15th or April 16th, he had run into Jason in the parking lot here. Jason seemed frustrated. Jason said to him that he recorded some conversations with me.
And did he make any specific reference to Mr. Trombley making a statement about Kevin Morano specifically?
Yes, so during the actual IA interview with Tim May, which was a little bit later on in the year, he again told me exactly what he told me before, but he also said that he had told me that he had recorded me saying something negative about Officer Morano, about not wanting him to be here, or which he had not been hired.
Do you understand that Detective May was reporting that Mr. Trombley had made a statement about recording you
Yes, that's correct.
commenting on Mr. Morano?
Yes, that's correct.
Did, when you conducted these interviews of these 9 officers, was anyone else present with you?
Yes. So,
And who was?
Yeah, Lieutenant Sheen was present during all of the interviews. And some of the interviews, those being interviewed opted to have a union representative with them.
And if someone had requested a representative, were they allowed to have a representative?
Yes, they were.
Did you interview Gary Gray as part of this investigation?
Yes, I did.
And what did Mr. Gray say in terms of conversations he has had with Mr. Trombley and possibly recording you or others in the administration?
So Officer Gray had recalled a meeting of some sort in the sergeant's office where Jason Trombley was present and Sergeant Scott Sagan was present. And they were sort of doing their own thing, and there was a discussion between Jason Trombley and Gary Gray, and Gary had said to Jason, "Did you record that conversation?" And it was a conversation that they were talking about that I had had with Jason. And Jason's reply was something to the sort of, no, not that one.
When Gary Gray testified,
Wasn't this in a question you asked Officer Gray?
Yeah, so,
What did he say?
yeah, Officer Gray told me that he was having a conversation with Jason Trombley. And he asked Jason, "Did you record that one?"
Okay.
And Jason replied to him, no, not that one.
Okay.
when Officer Gray was providing his testimony during the internal investigation, did he describe the statement as asking Mr. Trombley if he had taped that conversation with you? And then, did he use that word?
Yes. And Gary was very specific. He uses the word taped, and he asked Jason, "Did you tape that conversation?"
And Officer Gray, what did he say Mr. Trombley's response was?
His response was, no, not that one.
Did Officer Gray, when he described that conversation, did he say whether Mr. Sagan was with him?
Yes, Mr. Sagan was with him.
And was Mr. Sagan interviewed as part of the internal investigation?
He was.
Was he interviewed separately than Officer Gray?
Yes, everybody was interviewed separately, except for those who wanted to have union representation there. They were just there as a witness for representation.
Did Sergeant Sagan's description of the conversation you just relayed to the commission, was it similar to Officer Gray's
Yes, it was.
testimony?
Yes, it was.
Did he actually also use the word taped?
Yes, we did.
Did you speak, do you know, when you spoke with Ed Kaczynski, who is an employee of the union, did he make any comments to you about whether Mr. Trombley had told him about recording any conversations you had about Officer Morano?
Yes. he did.
And what did Mr. Kaczynski say about some comment being made about Officer Morano?
So on April 17th, when I met with Mr. Kaczynski, Mr. Sagan, and Mr. Gray, Mr. Kaczynski had told me that Jason had told him on the 10th and during their meeting that he had recorded conversations with me and other administration and had me on tape saying something negative about Officer Morano, about him not wanting to be here or should have never been hired.
And it was Mr. Kaczynski who first relayed that conversation to Mr. Gray and Mr. Sagan, who then relayed the conversation on to Mr. Sheehan, correct?
That's what I was told, yes.
And did Mr. Kaczynski confirm that in your own conversations with him?
Yes.
And when you spoke with Mr. Trombley, at any point in time, did he acknowledge that he had in fact mentioned Mr. Morano's name to either Detective May or to Mr. Kaczynski or anyone else?
Mr. Trombley said that he did not mention Kevin Morano or anybody else's name. He said that I did not say any specific names whatsoever, so he said that he could not have possibly told anybody that, any specific names.
And did you interview Mr. Trombley as part of the internal investigation?
I did.
And did he have Attorney Ment with him during that?
He did.
During the internal investigation, did you renew your request for Mr. Trombley's alleged recordings of you?
I did. I requested it again on August 8th.
Okay. And let me, if I may. I'll just have this marked as Exhibit 3.
No objection.
Chief Boulder, what I've marked as Exhibit 3, is that a communication you had with Officer Trombley renewing your request for his recordings of you?
Yes, as well as his attorney.
And did you receive those recordings in the format you had requested?
No, I did not. I did receive them on August 13th, but not in the format requested.
And how were they not compliant with your request in terms of the format you had asked for?
So they didn't have any original metadata on it once again, and Officer Trombley came in, or Sergeant Trombley had come into the office and said, you know, here are the files that you requested, my notes as you requested. So I took the thumb drive from him, and we sort of had a conversation that lasted a couple minutes. And during that conversation, just sort of bits and pieces were coming out. So I was asking, well, how did you transfer this original copy over? And he said, oh, I did the save as function, and I did this. But then he said, well, it's not going to show metadata from the original time that the file was created, where my notes were created. It's going to show, I think it was the day before. And I asked why, because that's what I was looking for. And he said that he went into the file and he didn't want to submit anything to me without spelling errors, so he made some spelling corrections, resaved it, and then that's why it showed the metadata for that day.
Mr. Chairman, just a question again on process. So would these types of notes be kept on a municipal computer, a police department computer, a home computer? Do we know? What does the metadata tell us that?
So sometimes the metadata does. I'm far from an expert with the metadata, but I don't know where these notes came from.
Was it your understanding that Officer Trombley was copying these notes from his home computer?
No, I don't know. I think it was. He had said early on that he takes handwritten notes, but then also he types. And I remember him, making the motion of typing on the computer. So my assumption was that these came from home, but since it was work related, it could have come from here.
At any point in time, did Officer Trombley ever indicate to you that the notes were actually available on the town server?
No.
If they were available on the town server, you wouldn't have had to involve Officer Trombley to make the copy, correct?
That's correct.
And again, in your, what's now Exhibit 3, you made very clear to Officer Trombley that one of the things you were interested in is reviewing the metadata of the supposed recordings he had made, correct?
Correct. And that was discussed as well during the interview with Attorney Ment on August 1st.
And based on your response a few moments ago, Officer Trombley recognized that the metadata would not be accurate because he had modified the document by correcting typos and making whatever other changes he might have made.
Correct.
Ultimately, what were your conclusions at the end of the internal investigation?
My conclusion was that there were several different areas of dishonesty and untruthfulness, combined with some insubordination, malicious gossiping, all things that were in violation of our policies. Based on that conclusion, I ultimately recommended his termination because of the dishonesty and untruthfulness.
In terms of the insubordination, what acts did you consider insubordinate?
Not replying to the directives for the metadata.
In terms of malicious gossip, what did you consider to be malicious gossip?
So there were conversations that Sergeant Trombley said that he was having with his group on the midnight shift, where he was discussing things that were getting them really upset and discontent about things, about his discipline. And we kind of tried to get through, like, why, how did it get to the point where the officers were saying to him, you should start recording conversations? And so I was trying to get that information out of it, but I couldn't. So I'm sort of assuming some of that was malicious gossip, but then also telling Detective May that he recorded conversations and that I said something negative about another officer. That was what I was considering malicious gossip, because it was decreasing the morale of the department.
And was it a single incident of untruthfulness that you concluded at the end of the investigation, or were there multiple instances?
There were multiple.
And those are detailed in your report?
They are.
Why are you recommending to this commission termination as the discipline?
I just don't see where sort of we could employ or house a police officer that has been shown to be dishonest and untruthful. We are not a large enough police department where maybe that there's no involvement in investigations or arrests. I think that everything that an officer does here, a sworn officer does here, has to do with investigations and arrests, and certainly speaks to the need for credibility, for trustworthiness. I mean, these, like I said earlier, are the essential qualities of a police officer and a police department. Honesty, trustworthiness, integrity. And I'm worried that, in sort of the big picture, this wasn't the recording, and what sort of led us to this was not, an egregious, an excessive use of force or allegations of criminal activity. But if he was willing to be dishonest and untruthful about this, what could happen if he was involved in a use of force incident or a criminal investigation where he may or may not have done something that was against policy or unlawful? I don't know whether he would be truthful or not.
Was this a difficult decision for you to make?
In one sense, it was extremely difficult.
Why was it difficult?
I had been here for 9 years when Jason was hired. I really like Jason as a person. I think he's been a good police officer. He went through the academy with us. At times I felt I sort of took him under my wing and provided him with some opportunities and insight that supervisors can do. I recommended him for assignments in the detective division, and he did a good job. He has satisfactory, if not sometimes higher, evaluations. I grew to be very fond of him, as a police officer and a person. So it was very difficult in that sense, because I have to remove myself from liking a person with what has happened. And really the priority of the police department, the town, the members who we serve, and our coworkers. And that really is the driving factor. And unfortunately, have to push those other things aside. I mean, we spent a lot of money in training Jason. The town has paid for his master's degree. We put a lot of effort. He put a lot of effort into his career. These things are so defining for an officer, defining for a department, that I just can't see any other alternative.
So even though it was a difficult decision in one regard, could you see any other alternative based on the conduct that the investigation concluded had occurred?
No, and I looked and I consulted and I could not see any other alternative. I felt that although it was a very difficult decision, it was a very, very clear decision.
I'd like to just put in two documents. One is, I'd like to put in the report. This one I think I got.
Right up to Exhibit 4?
Yep, next one will be 4.
No objection.
Chief, just for the record, what's been marked as Exhibit 4, is that the report that you have prepared at the conclusion of your investigation and submitted to the police commission?
Yes, it is.
And then the last document I'd like to put in is the contract, like it's already agreement. Make that Exhibit 5. You have this.
No objection.
And just to confirm, Chief, what's been marked as Exhibit 5 is that the collective bargaining agreement that governs police officers such as Officer Tremblay, who are in the bargaining unit.
Yes.
With that, I have no further questions for this witness.
Mr. Schmidt, do you have any questions?
I do.
for the witness?
I do, thank you. Hi, Chief, how are you, sir?
Thank you, sir. How are you?
Good. So, I'm going to go back a little bit before this matter came to exist. I want to take you back to 2018, and I want to talk to you about your assessment of Jason as a sergeant, as well as other colleagues of his that worked midnights, and whether or not you thought good or bad of their productivity. So let's go back in time. And was there a time when you spoke to Jason about his performance as a midnight shift supervisor?
Yes.
And when was that?
That was March 14th, 2019.
Okay. Was that the first time you spoke to him about that?
I don't recall.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about what led to that discussion and what was said from your perspective.
For that March 14th?
Yes, sir.
So we had identified some deficiencies on midnight shift, particularly with supervision and performance. And so we discussed it. We discussed what those things were, and we had asked why these things were happening. I'm not sure what.
Okay. As a result of that, your decisions about that supervision, did you issue any discipline, including a written warning?
Yes,
And when did you do that?
April 2nd,
And what year?
2019.
Okay. And what was the basis for issuing the discipline?
The basis was neglect of duty and insubordination and I believe incompetence.
Was a grievance filed?
Yes, a grievance was filed.
Shortly after that? Within a short period of time?
Yeah, within the contract, yeah.
What's the basis for the grievance? Is that still pending too?
Yes.
What's the basis of that grievance?
Excessive discipline, and that the grievant had already been disciplined.
And the basis for Ori being disciplined was what?
Was a discussion on March 14th when it was brought to their attention that there were issues.
Is it the grievant position that you had said that no discipline would be imposed, and then subsequent to that, you did issue a letter of written warning?
I don't know if that's their position.
Okay. Do you remember saying that you wouldn't issue any discipline when you first spoke to Jason?
Never did I say that.
Okay. So when all of this stuff is going on about you asking for his private notes on his personal computer, he has a pending grievance against you.
Objection informed.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So let me ask you this question. Do you have a right to ask your employees for their personal notes?
I think in this circumstance I did, yeah.
Could you send out a directive to your members tomorrow and say, give me any personal notes you have where I'm mentioned?
If there was a specific reason to.
What's the lawful basis to ask for someone's diary or personal notes, sir? And I understand you're the chief, and I do not mean to be disrespectful, so please don't take any of this that way.
I'm not taking it that way.
But what allows you to ask someone for their personal notes?
So Jason brought forward that this was, some potential reasoning of his explanation. So
What if-
I said, go ahead and show me.
What if 5 officers come in tomorrow and say, Chief, I've been taking notes about you. Every time you talk to me, sir, I write it down at home. Do you really believe you can ask them to produce those?
Were they dishonest about something that led to that?
The fact that you're asking for the personal, do you agree that people are entitled to take personal notes?
Sure.
Do you?
I had no objections to that.
Do you take any personal notes?
I do.
Could someone ask you for them? Could I ask you through the Freedom of Information for your personal notes from home?
You may be able to ask me, I just don't know if you would.
You wouldn't give them to me. That's the point, right, sir? You don't have the lawful, police officers have to respond to lawful orders. Do we agree about that? Is it a lawful order to ask someone to turn over their personal notes?
I believe in this case it was.
And your belief is based on what, sir?
And that, again, he produced this idea that this was the reasoning why he went from, no, I don't record, to, oh, yes, I do record, and what I mean by recording is written notes. So then the next logical is, well, let's see those written notes.
Do you remember when we were in the interview in your conference room, you actually said that you weren't interested in the content of the notes, you only wanted the metadata. Did you ever relay that in any of these written directives? Did you ever say, I don't want to read your personal notes that you wrote about me, that you may want to use in your pending grievance, I just want the metadata?
No.
Why not?
Not written, I did not. That was part of the discussion.
Okay.
That was part of the discussion on 2 different occasions. One between Attorney Harrington and you, and the second during that interview that you were at, where we discussed that. And then I asked again on August 8th, and I still didn't get that.
Right, so you're actually hitting on an important part of the story. This experience involved Attorney Harrington and me and you, right, and Jason.
Yes.
And you know that we took the position that you didn't have a right to his personal notes,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So it wasn't as if he was just blowing you off. We were explaining the basis for our objection, correct? You didn't agree.
Correct.
You wanted it nonetheless. Do you remember telling me that you didn't want to read the content first time when you're asking for his notes? Or did you just simply say, put it on the thumb drive and give it to me, essentially?
To you?
Yeah, because we were all on these emails back and forth about what you were asking for, and you've produced some of them here, you've got me copied on them. None of them say, sir, produce the metadata only, or don't worry, Jason, I'm not going to read your personal notes. They didn't say that, right?
Correct.
So, do you think it's reasonable for an employee to have a concern about turning over his notes to his boss that he has a grievance pending against?
Yeah, I guess it's reasonable to have a
Okay.
concern.
Right. It's reasonable to have a concern because for a number of reasons, it's an invasion of privacy, right? You're asking him for his private notes. He has a grievance pending against you. You know that he says he's been taking notes about what you're interacting about. Are you telling me that you didn't expect to find something about the whole grievance, the basis of his grievance, the written warning? That's what you would have been writing about, right?
So I told you that I wasn't interested in looking at it, and I believe I told you that, even if it was something that was unrelated, I didn't care about that. And I had actually said, I'm not sure if there's any benefit in asking for that again. And then you said, well, why don't we consider that? Why don't we
And he
do that?
gave it to you.
And so then I did. I don't know. I didn't open it up.
Well, that's the story, sir. After we were in your office and we had this discussion and you said, for the first time to me, I don't want to read the stuff, I just want to see the metadata. He then gave it to you. And then you said, this doesn't help, this is too late, I can't use this. That's what you told him, right?
But no, that's what I said in the interview.
No, but then he gave it to you.
Then he gave it to me, and again, I didn't look at it, didn't look at the first one. He told me that the metadata was not going to be accurate on the one that he gave me. So I said, right, so what value is this? If I was looking for the metadata, and that's what you said that I was looking for, why would I even bother looking at it? If
When
said
you
this-
first asked him for his notes, whether it was in person or in these email, which they're cloaked as directives and orders, right? You're ordered today, immediately. That's a direct order, right?
Sure.
Is it a lawful direct order for someone to turn over their personal notes?
I believe in this case it wasn't lawful order.
Okay. And your basis is because why?
Because he introduced it as potential reasoning for his, again, flopping from recordings. I never recorded to, oh yeah, I recorded, this is how I recorded.
Isn't it, sir, a bit disingenuous to claim that when he first gave you the notes, you're claiming that, oh, you're shocked and surprised that it's not the original. We told you it wouldn't be the original, that he was redacting stuff he didn't want you to read about you.
I was not told that.
You were not.
Correct.
Okay. So you thought that when he first gave you the first document, you thought that that was all of his original notes.
I thought it was the request for the notes that he was talking about.
Despite knowing that you gave him that order, there were email exchanges between Attorney Harrington and me saying he's not going to give you the original document because he feels it's an invasion of privacy and it's his personal notes and he feels he can redact it, right?
I don't recall it anymore.
So, did you ever read any of the notes?
Which notes?
Anything he gave you?
I didn't open either one up.
Wait, okay, never.
Never.
Don't you think that would have been helpful to tell him in the beginning? Don't you think that this thing that basically has snowballed into this giant meeting where you're trying to terminate a veteran sergeant, don't you think you could have said in the beginning, to nip it in the bud, Sergeant, I know you have a pending grievance against me, and I presume that some of your notes are about that matter, and it would be an unfair advantage for me to see your private notes. So please, sir, don't give me your private notes. Just find a way to get me the metadata. You never said that. You simply said, put it on a thumb drive, drag and click it, and give it to me. That's like me giving my trial strategy to the other side. What's the difference? What's the difference, sir? Why do you have the lawful legal right, absent a search warrant, to get someone's personal information that presumably is what they're going to use in the grievance that you already have pending.
At this point, I'm going to object. I think this is the third time Attorney Ment has asked, why did you ask for the notice? And he's gotten an answer. Obviously, he's not happy with the answer.
No, I am happy with his answer,
Okay,
really.
then,
Well,
why
then,
do you keep
Are we
asking?
good?
Sure.
Okay.
So, when you started to question Jason, and when you were suggesting that his conduct was insubordinate, right? You gave a memo. You said earlier tonight that you considered it insubordination that he hadn't responded, and so this is before the initiation of your internal affairs investigation.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out which one you're talking about, because you talked about supervision deficiencies earlier on.
Yeah, so we're moving on to
What-
the topic now about the notes and about
Yes.
giving you the
Yes,
notes.
Yes, I believe it was June 5th.
Okay.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.